What's going on, everyone? My name is Chris, and for all my followers, you already know I'm addicted to video games. I love talking about video games and I love posting videos about it. But what you don't know, I am also a certified chef. So in this video, I'm gonna start with one of my favorite recipes for rye bread. Jumping right into the video. As you can see, I've already prepared all the ingredients I need. I'm gonna put all the measurements in the description so you can make your own loaf of rye bread. So talking about the ingredient, we have 1.5 tablespoons of honey, 1.5 tablespoons of salt, and as well we have 1.5 tablespoons of instant dry yeast. Now for the flavoring part, I use 2 tablespoons of caraway seeds. As you can see, I'm not grounding them down, I'm leaving them whole, and a good handful, maybe 2 handfuls of walnuts. Crush them down and put them in the dough. I'm gonna show you later. Also, we have 2.5 cups of rye flour. I'm using the other flour I'm using is all-purpose flour. It is only 2 cups, but we're gonna get to that part in a bit. So first I'm gonna mix all the ingredients together. You grab a bowl, you grab a spoon, or I usually take the wooden spoon, and I also recommend you to take the parchment paper, but it's not really parchment paper. It's more like a plastic film which is fire resistant and heat resistant. So cutting board obviously as well, but you don't really need it for preparation. So here we have 2 cups of warm water, and please be sure it is warm water. Don't make it too hot, don't make it too cold, otherwise the instant dry yeast will not react to it. So first we're gonna put the 2 cups of water in. Just stick your finger in and see if you feel it is a bit too hot. Let it cool down, or put a little bit cold water to it, not too much. And also put in the salt. Next thing, we are putting in the instant dry yeast. Gonna give it a stir, just a little bit. Also we are adding the honey. I'm just using, I think it was the blossom honey, but every honey will do. You don't want honey which is already flavored. I know there are honey with thyme or honey with cinnamon. I would not recommend that. Use just honey without any flavoring. So gonna put it in the bowl as well. We're gonna mix it together, stir again. Mix it well together. We want the instant dry yeast to completely dissolve, and we're gonna add now the caraway seeds. You can just put it into the liquid and it will incorporate in the dough later on as we work on the dough. Also, you're gonna take the walnuts, you crush them a little bit, you put them in the liquid as well, and as I said before, crush them down a little bit. You don't want them too much. You see, kind of overdoing it a little bit. You still want to have the crunchiness of the nuts in the bread. The way I did it in the video was a bit too much, I think, but the result should be the same. We are now adding the all-purpose flour first, mixing that together as well until we have a nice and smooth mixture. Gonna scratch down the bottom part and the sides. And now we're gonna add a few spoons of the rye flour. While I'm mixing the dough, let me talk a little bit about the rye bread. People were first farming rye around 7000 BC in the Stone Age, but because the Indo-Europeans were mostly cattle herders, rather than farmers. They didn't farm rye that much at first. They kind of thought it was more like something before they starve, they're gonna eat it. And also because rye is a little bit different to other grains. It doesn't need so much fertile soils, and it can grow in much colder climates. It was more common in northern regions, like in Russia or in Poland, or even northern parts of Germany. Also, a pretty cool fun fact is around 500 AD, when the Vikings brought the rye as far west as like Iceland and Greenland. People thought of rye bread. It's the food for the poor. Rich people would eat the white bread, the wheat bread, and yeah, the poor people would have eaten the rye bread. To be honest, these days it is a bit different. I mean, you can pick up a loaf of toast bread in any supermarket for under $1. And rye bread, a loaf of rye bread, I'd say around $2.50, maybe $3. So that's how different it was back then. Now, getting back to our dough, as you can see, the more flour we add, the more difficult it gets to work it. In a bit, we're gonna transfer the dough to our working space. And here, a little tip. Don't use cutting boards or maybe, I don't know what else. There's saran wrap you can put on the bottom for dough. Don't use that. The dough will definitely stick on it, and you will have a hard time working on it. So just grab a working space, put some flour on it, and then transfer the dough from the bowl to the working space. And now the fun part begins. At this stage, you already can smell the bread dough, and that smell is just amazing. So here you can see for working the dough, I'm using again just regular flour. Don't over flour the dough, it gets too hard and you don't want that. You want it nice and fluffy. So don't use too much flour and don't work it too hard. Be gentle, just roll the dough, move it back and forth and not in it. And after a while, you can feel when it stops sticking, the dough is finished. So, and as you can see here now in the video, the way to work the dough is you push it, you pull it, you push it, and then you pull it back to you. That way you incorporate all the ingredients nicely together and make a nice and firm dough. Also, something I want to mention, in my recipes, or in this recipe for example, I'm giving you guidelines. I'm not telling you stick to all the ingredients. Sure, use the same amount of flour, use the same amount of water, as well as the same amount of the instant dry yeast. But when it comes to the flavoring part, for example, the walnuts, the caraway seeds, even the honey, you can experiment, you can play with it. It took me, I'd say 10-15 attempts until I had my perfect loaf of bread. So you even can put in dry fruits. Once I tried dried peaches, wasn't too good, wasn't my flavor. I didn't like it too sweet, but it only should show you that you can do everything you want with the bread. So once the dough is nice and firm and has the consistency we want, so it doesn't stick to your fingers anymore, we transfer it to a baking sheet and we're gonna cover it. So while I further work the dough, let me talk a little bit about the YouTube channel. In the future, you can expect a lot of more cooking related videos. I've decided to try to put out every week another recipe video of mine. I haven't got any cookbooks yet, or I haven't got any fancy web pages yet. I wanted to wait to see how the response is, how you guys like it, And if you guys like it, I'm definitely gonna make more content. Another thing here I want to mention, if you leave out the nuts of the dough, leave out the nuts, leave out the caraway seeds, and you cut the dough. Once the dough is nice and firm, and you cut it in little pieces, and you roll it out like tortillas or pancakes. So you just roll it out, and then you fry it in a pan, and you add some chives and some creme fraiche, a little bit garlic and salt, mix it together and put it on top of the pancakes. This is actually really nice. I'm gonna show you that in my next video. And also one of my favorites, I'm gonna show you how to make ginger ale. Talking about the heat in the oven. So we're gonna preheat the oven on 450 degrees. Afterwards, we leave the bread for approximately 30-35 minutes in the oven. If you have a crappy oven like me, you might have to consider 45-50 minutes. If you have a good oven, maybe just 30 minutes. So also the dough. Important thing I want to say is, if you have the dough ready to go, cover it in a wet towel, but before you do so, take the towel off again and put the bread dough on a baking sheet already. I've already prepared a baking sheet. I've put an aluminum foil so I don't have the spikes or the rails from the baking tray onto my bread. So I'm using the aluminum foil and putting on the baking sheet, the brown paper, I don't know what's it called. I'm gonna put that on there, and then I'm gonna put the wet towel on top of it. Leave it rest for approximately an hour, and afterwards don't touch the bread. Put it right away in the oven. And now the part you've all waited for. We're gonna take out the bread out of the oven. So after around 30, 35, 40 minutes, depending on the oven, we're gonna take it out the oven, and you can see the result. You may think the color isn't quite what we want, but for me that's the perfect example of a nice loaf of bread. And if you don't like the color, if you want it more shiny, and you can use a brush, use cornstarch with water, mix it, put it a little bit in the microwave, and then brush the clear fluid on the bread, which gives you a nice and shiny crust. So here you can see the bread is perfectly cooked. I couldn't resist. I had to grab a piece, and here you can see I'm taking out the inner part, and there's nothing gluey, nothing sticks. It's a perfect fluffy bread. So I hope you enjoyed my video, and I'm definitely gonna come back with lots of more recipes. So stay tuned, subscribe to my channel, and hit the like button.